Hello everyone, I am so excited to welcome you to the 102nd episode of Paola's Studiolo, and I'm truly honored to be in the studiolo of my dear professor, Rab Hatfield. Thank you so much.
Honored to be here.
It is such an honor and pleasure to be here. I was your student in about 19 years ago. I came to study in Florence, and studying with you has been absolute privilege.
She was a great TA.
Yes, I actually had this great pleasure to be Professor Hatfield's TA, teaching assistant for a class on Leonardo da Vinci.
That's right.
So this might be the first book on Michelangelo I am reading, but I'm just kidding, of course. But it was really such a pleasure to study with you, Professor Hatfield. And
well, thank you.
what I would love to start with here is actually also say a special welcome to all the Syracuse grads, past and present, who also have joined this call live. I think we are in for a treat, all of us. But I wanted to start this event, Professor Hatfield, asking you, when did you know you wanted to be an art historian?
Well, okay, you're asking for it. It's going to take a while. When I was in college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And after various trials, I ended up in a field called architectural sciences. But discovered doing architectural sciences that I'm definitely not cut out to be an architect. So in my senior year, as it happened to be very easy at that time to get Fulbrights to Germany, I applied for one and got it and went to Germany. And when I got there, I had no idea what I wanted to do. But I was faced with a choice between technical university or regular university. And obviously, this being Germany, I preferred the regular university. And that meant art history. So I sort of piled in, and having Harvard training, I was easily able to outclass most of my classmates, so I did very well in my courses. Got a renewal and came back to Harvard after 2 years in Munich and decided to go on in art history, since it was something I guess I was good at. And since I was able to read German without any problems, and since German was still pretty much at that time the major language of art history, I easily outclassed all of my classmates, and so managed to do very, very well. So at the end of my time at Harvard, when it was time to do my dissertation, I got a fellowship to Villa Itati, where I was for a couple of years. And during that time, I met a Dutch girl, and we fell in love, and we got married. And I went back to New Haven to teach at a place called Yale. But she was very unhappy in New Haven. And so we ended up coming back here. I was lucky enough to get a job with Syracuse University in Florence and stayed on for about 42 years, or maybe a year or two more, and loved it. And had people like Paola helping me. So that's how.
Yes, I will never forget our visits around Florence, but also Milan, where we would kind of go following Leonardo's footsteps in the city, and then Paris as well. Those were the days,
So anyway, the moral of all of this is, if you don't think you know what you want to do, just sort of go with it, go with the flow. And maybe things will turn out very well for you anyhow.
Yeah, almost like the life takes us in the right direction, isn't it? Mm-hmm. There are signs by the road. We just need to kind of follow them, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. But I think how lucky are we to be able to live in Florence, to go to places, see them where the creators, see what works of art where the creators wanted it to be.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Is that what kept you here?
Well, it's very, well, what kept me here more than anything else was the fact that my wife didn't want to go back to the U.S.,
Yeah.
but I was perfectly happy here anyway. So.
And in the archives as well.
And it's so wonderful to teach in front of real works of art and to
Yes.
study real works of art.
Yes.
If you're just studying out of books, you're not getting a real sense of what the work of art is that you're looking at.
Yes. Your newest book, Soul and Body of Michelangelo, is extraordinary. It has been such a great read. I wanted to ask you, when did you first start thinking of this idea?
I can't remember, but it probably was 3 or 4 years ago.
Okay.
And all it was at the time was part of a chapter in a big book on Michelangelo's David that I'm in the process of finishing now. And as it says in the preface to the book, this study just kept growing and growing until it obviously was much too big to belong in a David book, and so it slowly became independent. And I learned an awful lot doing it.
I wanted to ask you if you think, could you have written this book maybe 10, 20 or 30 years ago? I feel it kind of changed, like Michelangelo's poetry changes through his lifetime. I read many of your books and your articles, but this one has such a philosophical and spiritual side to it.
I think I could have. It's just a question of when I fell into it.
Yes.
As I was telling you before, one day, for some reason or other, I learned that Aristotle says that the soul is the form of the body. And I was just absolutely astonished. What? And that led me to inquire into certain things.
Yes, and thanks to your book, I actually learned that I have more of a kind of Platonian vision of this, and I don't think that our soul is the form of our body, but actually just a small part of us. But anyway, I would say let's just jump right into it.
Okay.
I will share a screen with some images. We only have about 9 images. Professor Hatfield will read his paper, exactly as we did in Syracuse. And then at the end of the presentation, if you have any questions, please pop them in the chat and I will read them to Professor at the end.
So I want to apologize to you for reading this, but I'm at that stage of life when it's easy not to find the word you want, and sometimes you drop ideas also, so I think it's just much safer if I simply read.
Perfect. So just see. Okay.
So,
Here we go.
first slide.
Yes.
That's not it.
Ah, sorry. Here we go.
There it is. I would like to speak to you about soul and body, especially as the relationship between soul and body applies in Michelangelo's marble David, which he completed when he was still only 29, and his Rondinini Pietà, which is his very last work. And what I want to encourage you to do is to try and learn to see less of the body in these works and many other works like them by Michelangelo and many other artists, and see more of what they called soul. I hope to convince you that whereas we today tend to see mostly body, especially in the David, Michelangelo and his contemporaries were more likely to see what they called soul, that is, what we now consider to be the inner person, but also much more. In order to do this, I shall have to spend some time explaining to you what Michelangelo and his contemporaries believed the human soul to be and what it meant to them. I hope it is clear to you that Michelangelo preferred to do idealized figures, especially nude, male, and in their prime. His animals are extremely weak, and his settings and landscapes aren't much better. But why this preference for idealized or glorified nude male bodies? One sure reason is that this kind of figure was a major subject in the art of antiquity, which his teachers had taught him to admire and study. For him, the mastery of the nude male body surely was the highest goal of the artist. Another possible reason for his preference for impressive nude males was his sexual orientation. But this is far from certain. If being gay is supposed to lead male artists to create heroic male figures, why didn't Donatello and Leonardo da Vinci make such figures? And we're not even all that sure that Michelangelo was homosexual, whereas we are sure about Donatello and Leonardo. We today admire the human body as an amazing, self-sufficient organism, the most highly evolved of all living creatures. And we are greatly fascinated by, and at times even obsessed with this body, both male and especially female. We have beauty contests, beach culture, striptease, industrialized porno, bodybuilding, and much more. None of these things existed in Michelangelo's day. Our fascination with such phenomena and with the beautiful human body in general, unfortunately, therefore, leads us to admire Michelangelo's figures mostly for their admirable physiques. But are their physiques all that Michelangelo wanted us to see in these figures? Let us turn now to the human soul as understood by Michelangelo and his contemporaries. Our soul, they believed, is an invisible force or power that makes us live. When our soul departs from our body, we shall die. Our soul is what makes us move and breathe. This belief proceeds naturally from the belief that our soul is the life force within us. If you want to determine whether some person or animal is alive or not, you usually check to see whether he, she, or it moves or breathes. Our soul is what enables us to sense things. In other words, seeing, hearing, tasting, and so on are operations of the soul. Our soul enables us to experience emotions. In other words, emotions are operations or movements of the soul. Love is an operation of the soul. Our soul enables us to think. Thinking, therefore, is also an operation of the soul, and a very important one, as it is our capacity to think which sets us apart from the animals, or so it was believed at the time. Most important for our purposes here today, it was generally believed that our soul has formed and structured our body. As Aristotle coined the idea, which is still affirmed by the Catholic Church, our soul is the form of our body. I repeat, our soul is the form of our body. It is what makes us human. It is what makes us what we are. It is why we are not horses, cows, or somebody else. Our soul, it was thought, has no physical existence. And so, being immaterial or pure spirit, it cannot decay or perish and is therefore immortal. Being immortal, it shares in the divine. As all theologians at the time affirmed, it is in our souls and not in our bodies that we are the image and likeness of God. In some cases, our soul leads us to yearn for the beyond. Stated differently, it was believed that we live because of our soul, look the way we do mainly because of our soul, are beautiful because of our soul, act the way we do because of our soul, sense things the way we do because of our soul, feel the way we do because of our soul, love the way we do because of our soul, make things the way we do because of our soul, and think the way we do because of our soul. In short, for Michelangelo and his contemporaries, our soul is our essence. It is what makes us us. Our body, on the other hand, would be just a lump of matter if it were not shaped and guided by our soul. And so, if we could somehow ask Michelangelo or one of his contemporaries what it is that animates us, that is, that makes us live and move, he would reply that it is our ultimately unknowable soul, which he believed that God or the Holy Ghost or Spirit has implanted in our body, that does this. He knew next to nothing about the operation of our heart and lungs. He no doubt imagined that our heart is what we love with, as well perhaps as where our courage comes from, or about oxygen, blood cells, blood circulation, nerve systems, brain signals, and so on. He at most might have thought that our soul transmits its power and its signals throughout our body by means of vibrations. He did have a fairly correct idea of how our muscles and tendons work. If we were to ask him what it is that makes us digest our food, assimilate liquids, and expel what we do not need of them, he would say that it is our soul that makes us do these things. He knew practically nothing about our digestive system and how its organs work. He probably thought that our strength and courage, and perhaps also our passions, originate in our liver. If we were to ask him how it is that we can sense things, why we have feelings and emotions, and why we experience pain, he would say that our soul is responsible for these sensations. He, of course, knew that we see with our eyes, hear with our ears, smell with our noses, and so on, but he knew next to nothing about how these organs really function, or about our nerve systems and their connection to our brain. If we were to ask him how it is that we love, he would reply that this is due to our soul, or better, he would say that our soul does our loving for us. If we were to ask him how it is that we think, he would answer that this is because our soul, or the intellective, rational, or cognitive, and he thought uniquely human part of it, which resides in our head, makes us do so, or better, he would reply that our soul, or intellective soul, does our thinking for us. He, of course, knew that we have a brain, but he would have been amazed to learn that this brain functions by itself and is not operated by some mysterious force or power that God or the Holy Ghost or Spirit has implanted in our body from without. He also would have been amazed to learn that this brain, although much more highly developed and usually larger, is not fundamentally different from the brains of other animals. If we were to ask Michelangelo why we look the way we do, he would answer that this is primarily due to the action of our soul and only secondarily to the effects of nature upon our body. In other words, he would say that it is our soul, or the intellective part of it, that makes us human and organizes and beautifies our body accordingly. He knew nothing about genes, DNA, and so on. And he would surely have been astonished to learn that we are descended, probably by chance, from the apes, as he assumed that God, by giving Adam the kind of soul that he did, made Adam the way he first was, that is, the way Adam was before he sinned, on purpose and without a defect. And finally, if we were to ask Michelangelo why some of us long to be united with God, he surely would reply, as many still would today, that it is our soul that impels us to do so. How did Michelangelo and his contemporaries believe that our soul relates to our body? As we have already seen, they believed that our soul is our body's form. Michelangelo even said so in one of his poems. Please keep in mind that this affirmation, which in fact means only that our soul shapes, structures, and orders our body, might at times be construed to mean that our soul and our body look alike. Our soul is an intelligent form. It is immortal, as forms, like ideas, cannot perish. Our body, on the other hand, is merely matter and is doomed to both decay and perish. Being an intelligent, immaterial, immortal force or power, as well as a form, our all-purpose soul, it therefore was concluded, is vastly superior to our body, which could not even exist without it. Our body is nevertheless the tool or instrument of our soul. Without its body, a soul is powerless. All it can do when it is naked or bodiless is to meditate and experience a few psychic states. The soul, it was generally believed, is present throughout all of the body. Please keep in mind that this belief leads to the conclusion that the soul might therefore have the same shape as the body, at least while it is in it. Our body is praiseworthy only to the extent that it reflects our soul. Being pure form, our soul is necessarily beautiful. For, at least in Latin, that which has form is beautiful by definition. Formosa, literally, form us, or that which has form, means shapely or beautiful in that language. And so it was generally believed our body is beautiful only to the extent that our soul has made it beautiful. So when you look at a beautiful body, you see a body that a beautiful soul has beautified. How does a body reflect the soul within it? According to St. Augustine, a human body reveals the presence of its soul through its beauty, grace, symmetry, and functionality. St. Thomas Aquinas wrote that the human body is constructed so as to show that it was made to contain an intellective soul, that is, a mind. The intellective soul, or higher soul, is that part of the soul, he thought, that makes us human. The soul's other two parts, the senses and the appetites, make us similar to the animals, as Plato so memorably wrote, and we, that is, our rational souls or reason, must guard against these inferior parts. According to the Florentine Neoplatonist Marsilio Ficino, whom Michelangelo is likely to have met as a boy, if one wishes to see someone's soul, one should try to picture that person with all material substance removed. In other words, one should try to see that person as pure form or structure. Please note that the person in question will still look basically the same, but his or her body will have no physical substance, nor any accidents or peculiarities, nor even any color. In a few minutes, we shall try ourselves to see the soul as Ficino recommends. Another way to see the soul, Ficino writes, is to picture a handsome, well-constructed man and then assign an intellectual gift or aspect of character to each of this man's most important features. Thus, Alertness in the man's body corresponds to the alertness of his mind. Strength in his body corresponds to his strength of mind or courage. Beauty in his body corresponds to his righteousness of character or justice. This is what Giorgio Vasari saw in the statue. Great size in his body corresponds to the greatness of his soul, that is, to his valor or nobility, and so on. All of these writers assume that when one looks at a human body, or at least a human body of a certain ideal kind, a viewer will see or at least be able to infer the nature of the soul within it. Even today, we tend to size up people we have just met according to, among other things, the physical appearance of their bodies and faces, foolish as this may be. Especially for artistic or poetic purposes, a soul, it was believed, may be pictured in bodily form. After all, God, who according to Plato is pure soul, and according to St. Thomas is pure act, which is almost the same thing, is usually depicted in human form. This brings us to the poetic as well as popular belief in ghosts in Western culture. Already in Homer and Virgil, we read about ghosts, that is, naked or bodiless souls that look just like the people from whose bodies these souls have departed. And in Dante, whose poetry Michelangelo loved, we read about innumerable recognizable naked souls or ghosts that have made themselves visible and even physically present by casting their forms into the air. Think of the ghost of Banquo in Shakespeare's Macbeth, or the ghosts that Dickens and Poe wrote about. Indeed, in the movies, we still see lots of ghosts depicted in the form of recognizable people, usually with their clothes still on, ridiculous as this may be. Consider as well how we usually picture angels, even if we believe them to be pure spirit. And then think of all the people. Next. We see in scenes of heaven or of the Last Judgment, including the famous one by Michelangelo. Although this rarely occurs to us, and probably never occurred even to the artists who painted or sculpted these scenes, these people, or at least most of them, can only be naked, that is, bodiless souls or ghosts, as their bodies still lie in their graves. By the way, being naked souls or ghosts, these people obviously shouldn't be wearing clothes either. And yet they are always shown as recognizable, usually clothed human beings. Michelangelo's Last Judgment is, or at least was, an important exception to this rule. For our present purposes, the points to keep in mind are, first, your soul is vastly superior to your body. And second, if your soul can look like you, then, at least for artistic or poetic purposes, you can look like your soul. And an artist can represent or at least suggest the presence of your soul by showing you in a certain way. Michelangelo and his contemporaries thus evidently thought it possible, or in any case poetically or artistically acceptable, to suppose that a body looks at least somewhat like its soul, that is, that one's body is an image, a copy, or at the very least a reflection of the marvelous immaterial form within it. What then does Michelangelo say about the human body and the human soul in his poetry? He discusses the body only 3 times. Once to complain about the physical distortions he is suffering while painting the Sistine ceiling, once in a very long and raunchy poem to complain about the defects and ailments in his aging body, and once to say that its soul is form and life to a human body. Nothing, I repeat, nothing about how beautiful the human body is, how graceful it is, how powerful it is, how dexterous it is, how useful it is, how much it can accomplish, what sensations it has, and so on. By contrast, Michelangelo discusses the human soul in dozens of his poems, in which he considers the soul from numerous points of view and draws numerous analogies between it and other, often artistic phenomena. In his poetry, he uses the word soul more than 120 times. He uses the word body less than 30, and even then, usually only in opposition to the word soul. It is clear then, at least in his poetry, that for Michelangelo, too, the soul is vastly superior to the body, just as it is for all his contemporaries. Next. So why, if he values the soul much more than the body, does Michelangelo concentrate so greatly on the idealized, often youthful male body in his art? Are we all agreed that one important reason why Michelangelo concentrates on the idealized male body in his art is that by showing this body in a certain way, he believes he can best bring out his idea of the soul it contains. This is not the only way. Many writers and artists of the period insist that the soul is best revealed in the face. But Michelangelo was not usually interested in faces. So how do you bring out in a statue the presence or operations of what then was believed to be the human soul? First, you should idealize as much as possible. The soul is free of accidents, including blemishes, deformations, and even color. It is pure form. If, as Ficino says, one's soul is one's idea, in the Platonic sense of model or prototype, then obviously the more one idealizes, the more one will approach the pure form of the soul. You should show movement, or at least potential movement. For, as we have just noticed, if some person or animal moves, he, she, or it is alive and must therefore possess a soul. You should make the subject young. The Catholic Church teaches that after your soul goes to heaven, it will be perfected there, and that when your body arrives in heaven on the last day, your by now perfected soul will once again enter your body and glorify it as well. Your body thus will return to the way it was when you were 20, according to Dante, or 30, according to St. Augustine. According to St. Paul, you will even resemble Jesus. That is, if you are male. You should make the subject naked. Obviously, if you put clothes on him, you will be concealing some of your idea of his soul. If you are a sculptor, you should work in white marble. This medium is the one that best creates a sense of permanence. Let us not forget that the soul is everlasting. If we accept uncolored glass or ice, white marble is also the medium that best creates a sense of pure form and thus the absence of matter. Did you know that a French visitor to Florence in the 15th century called Michelangelo's David a phantasm? I repeat, a phantasm. And finally, an artist can take advantage of a spectator's expectations. Let us suppose that we are looking at a picture, even a snapshot, of a friend or a loved one, or else at an image of some famous person. There are two ways in which we are likely to experience this picture or image. Either we will see, or imagine that we see, what the subject in it is, has been, and will be for us always or forever. Or else, we will see what the subject looked like only at the moment that the picture was taken or the image was made, especially if the picture or image was made while the subject was involved in some activity. As an example of what I mean, next. As an example of what I mean by always or forever, let us consider the statue of Abraham Lincoln in his memorial in Washington, D.C. When we look at the statue, we are likely to see Lincoln's legendary honesty, the great things he accomplished, and the goodness in him of which we were convinced even before we came to admire his famous statue in this lovely memorial. In other words, we shall see what we came expecting to see. We thus shall see, or think we see, what Lincoln is for us always. It probably will not even enter our minds that he did not always look this way, if indeed he ever did. All that we ask of the statue is that make him look as admirable and as memorable as possible. What we see or think we see, then, is the basically immutable inner or true Lincoln, or, as Michelangelo would have said, Lincoln's beautiful immaterial soul. And what we really do see, that is the stone image of the outer or material Lincoln, is of importance to us only insofar as it encourages us to see the inner or true man that we came to admire. When, on the other hand, we experience in some picture or image, say of a loved one or a friend, the person represented as that person was only at the moment the picture was taken or the image was made, we see only the outer or transitory man, woman, or child. It probably does not even occur to us as we look at this picture or image of this person whose outward appearance, we know, has already changed since the picture was taken or the image was made, that this person's personality or inner being has not changed, or at least has changed very little. It cannot have changed much, for if it did, the person in question will have become a different person. We might at most notice that he or she appears to be experiencing some emotion or thinking something. But we also know that whatever it was, this emotion or thought must have ended not long after the picture was taken or the image was made. How different it would be with a consummately made portrait photo or painting, usually of just the face or the bust of the same person, in which portrait we are encouraged to see how he or she always was and always will be. I hope you see what I mean. It is the always in Michelangelo's David with which we are mostly concerned here. So let us try to see what Michelangelo would have thought was David's soul using the approach recommended by Marsilio Ficino. Ready? Try to see just the form of the statue. It might help if you try to picture the statue in a different material, such as clay or bricks. Can you do that? That shouldn't be too hard. And if you can successfully visualize the statue in some other material, that means that you have perceived the statue's form, probably without realizing it. Congratulations. Now, try to imagine, as Michelangelo and his contemporaries often did, that you were looking at a real person rather than just a statue. The form is the same. Of course, this real man's appearance will change somewhat with the passage of time, but he will always look basically the same. He cannot turn into a different person. And more important, when this world ends, this man's form will revert to at least approximately the way in which we see it here. Or so Michelangelo and his contemporaries believed. His true form, then, will be with him always. Or we could say that his true form is eternal. But the true form of his body is nothing other than his soul. That is what Michelangelo believed, and that is what the Catholic Church still affirms. So, probably without realizing it, you are here being allowed at least a glimpse at Michelangelo's idea of David's soul. I hope that David is starting to look a little different to you now. I hope you are beginning to see a great man, a righteous man, a courageous man, a steadfast man, a man with a beautiful mind, a man who is capable of noble and heroic deeds, and not just a cocky adolescent. I hope you are beginning to see a man who deep down will always be this way, because this statue's purpose is to tell us, or at least to remind us, of what was and still is important about him. Isn't that what matters? But there is possibly more. Although the literature on the statue rarely points this out, the real David was very handsome, very large, and amazingly strong, at least according to the Bible. In addition to that, the Bible tells us the Spirit of God entered him at a very early age and remained inside him for the rest of his life. Now, there is something resembling God in all of us. And according to what was believed in Michelangelo's day, that something is what was then believed to be our soul. But there was more of this godlike force or power in David, whom God especially loved. There was what in Michelangelo's day was believed to be the Holy Spirit or Holy Ghost, one of the three parts of the Holy Trinity. And David was the direct ancestor of Jesus, another of the three parts of the Holy Trinity. Theologians at the time conjectured that David, therefore, must have looked very much like him, as well as been very much like him. Can you see that in the statue? Can you see that there seems to be something Christ-like in this young hero? But there is even more. To the extent that you perceived or are reminded of David's soul, or at least just say the true David or the David that really matters, when you look at this statue of him, you are looking at, or at least being reminded of something that, according to what was believed at the time, was, is, and always will be. You not only see an idealized representation of an extraordinary young man who lived long ago, but you also see, or at least reminded of, that man's greatness which he owed to his everlasting soul. You thus see all of that great man, not just one moment in his young life. That at least is what Vasari saw, not just the plucky boy who defied Goliath with just a sling, but also the righteous ruler who was Israel's greatest king. Do you remember that Catholics believe that when David's body goes to heaven, his already perfected soul will restore it to the way it was when he was 20 or 30? There is no harm in your thinking, if you wish, that this, therefore, is how David will look when this world ends. Who knows? If you are good, you might even come across him at that time, after you too have been physically admitted to heaven, and your body has been glorified by your now perfected immortal soul. So try to stop thinking that you are looking at a remarkable specimen of a self-sufficient organism, and try to imagine that you are looking at the material image of an immaterial form that comes into the body from without, and which form is the one created by God of the true, everlasting David. So far, so good. But there are two big problems which I hope have already occurred to some of you. What we have said so far can apply only to images of men. For reasons that should be obvious, the figure of a beautiful naked woman, at least in most cases, cannot be presented to a viewer as the representation of that woman's immortal soul. With rare exceptions, an artist can show a woman's soul only through her face. And this is what Michelangelo had to do in his Rome Pietà. Michelangelo almost certainly thought that Mary was the most beautiful woman who ever lived. And her beauty, he surely supposed, was due to the beauty of her inner being. In Michelangelo's statue, Mary's face is sublimely beautiful and surely conveys much of her goodness. But we see next to nothing of her body. And now the second problem. It is all very well to imagine that your immortal soul is reflected in your body when you are young and good-looking. But what is your soul supposed to look like when you have become old and decrepit? Can it be that one's soul gets uglier as one's body ages? That somehow seems hard to believe. Doesn't one's soul usually improve with age, as one becomes wiser and often more God-fearing? What about physically unattractive people such as Socrates or Gandhi? Did they have ugly souls? If the soul is pure form and is free of the accidents of nature, how can it still be reflected in a body that is wizened and full of blemishes? You know that Michelangelo lived an incredibly long life in an age when life expectancy for people who made it past infancy was no more than 60. At the end, he suffered from and loudly complained about all kinds of ailments and bodily defects. He surely asked himself, just as we did, how his decrepit body could still be the reflection or image of his immortal soul. And he now concluded, as we know from his poetry, that the human body is a superfluous bulk or mass that has to be chipped away, like the excess marble that is removed during the carving of a marble statue, if one wishes to get at the now trembling soul inside it and that soul's operations. No longer the soul's beloved tool or instrument, the body now for him is a useless husk that needs to be thrown away. Instead of using its body in order to achieve its aims, a soul now must struggle against it. The body is now the enemy of the soul. Even love can now be the soul's enemy. No longer its sweet, desired, and necessary home, the artist's body now is something from which his frightened soul wants to free itself at the huge price of bringing about the death of its body and thereby even rendering itself powerless. And while his trembling soul naturally hopes that it will be taken to heaven, it also fears that it may undergo the second death, that is, eternity in hell. The despondent artist believes that his art is in decline. And he writes in one of his poems, as he writes in one of his last poems, making images of his dear Lord, all of which in fact show Jesus either dead or dying, makes him think of his own death, and as a result, his art dissolves. Art and death, he writes, do not go together. The great artist even comes to renounce his art. In what is perhaps his most famous poem, written late in his life, he says that painting and sculpture were once his idols, and asks what good they are to him now, as they only lead one to desire that which is detrimental to oneself. You are now looking at the Rondinini Pietà, which is in Milan. This Pietà is Michelangelo's last work. He was still working on it, or whittling it, just days before he died. I hope you can see that, at least according to the way in which Michelangelo now evidently thought about the statue, the art has gone out of it, and that the bodies we see in it now seem to conceal, obstruct, and conflict with the soul, rather than revealing and aiding it. Some viewers, including myself, nevertheless come away from late works, such as the Rondinini Pietà, with an even more powerful sense of soul than they do when viewing many of Michelangelo's other most famous statues. I've often asked myself why this should be so. It could be that I've just become very old. Or perhaps it is because in these late works we obviously are not being asked to admire the body for itself, and so we look for the feeling. And because the soul in these figures somehow seems more naked and free, as well as more modern. Perhaps your appreciation is the same as mine, or will be someday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Hatfield, what an amazing topic and what incredible illustrations in your book.
Well, thank you.
We were able to only show a few of these images.
And thank them.
Yes. I think there's some questions in the chat, but I wanted to ask you two things. One is, how about Leonardo? How is he different from Michelangelo in this sense? He was so obsessed with studying human body and anatomy, but is he talking about the human soul?
You know, I've never thought about this very much, and this is something it would take a long, long time to get right. I don't think this will help many of our viewers, but anyway, Leonardo's attitude towards the world around him was much more Aristotelian. And whereas Michelangelo saw the soul as something that the body as something the soul very often needs to be beware of, for Leonardo, the body is the soul's friend.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm sorry, I have to pass on this. I mean, it would take me weeks and weeks to work out what I really think about it.
I didn't mean to sprang this question, but you know, now in the Accademia in Venice, there is Leonardo's Vitruvian Man is on the view, which never happened. It doesn't really happen that often. So I've been kind of looking at his anatomical studies, and you kind of see Leonardo dedicated to this. Yeah. I mean, he's dissecting bodies, and he goes in layers, one after the other. Yeah. So I think that his vision was so much more scientific in a way.
Leonardo, certainly.
Michelangelo is the poet who kind of has this dreamy soul almost. The other question I wanted to ask, sometimes if you look at the diaries of the people in the 15th century Florence, they often speak about regular Florentines coming up to actually speak to statues, like
Absolutely.
Saint Mark
Absolutely.
or Saint George by
Yes.
Donatello.
Yes.
So did they believe their soul was in there?
That's why I asked you to try to see the statue as a real person, because that's how very often they looked at statues. They imagined them to be living, real beings.
Yes. Let's take a look at the chat and see
Yes.
what our viewers have to say. I know there were some interesting things coming up. Let's see. All right. Okay, so we have plugged in your book in the chat. If you want to order the book, there is Amazon link in the chat, and also your others books that people can find on Amazon. If I remember correctly, in Dante's Divine Comedy, Beatrice is clothed, considering that she is viewed as the epitome of virtue in the Divine Comedy. Is there a difference in the depictions of the souls for men versus women?
Well, it's what we talked about. First of all, I'd like to say something about Amazon, if I may, which I have a great deal of experience with. Amazon.it publishes this book as of May the 5th, whereas Amazon.com, I think, is going to publish the book only as of the end of June. You may not realize it, but you can order the book right away on Amazon.it. It might take it a while to arrive because the mails are pretty slow. But if you're on Amazon.com, you are automatically already on Amazon.it. And all you have to do is ask for the book and pay for it, and it will automatically convert from euros into dollars, and the book is yours. Okay, Beatrice, I haven't thought that much about Beatrice either, except that as well as I know, which is not very much, I think she is more or less Dante's ideal of the soul. But he never tries to picture to picture her in terms of a body, because you really can't. He tries to picture it in terms of light and atmosphere and words. Let's face it, words are different from images, and you can do certain things with them that images can't do. But as Leonardo says, one image is worth 5,000 words. So.
Yes. I agree that Michelangelo saw his creations as divinely shaped and of superior characteristics. This is a colleague who writes this. However, the trend in Italian Renaissance art was to idealize characters and make them look as best as possible, unlike the Northern Renaissance artist who showed scars, blemishes, etc.
True.
Yes. Anyways, such an enrichment in our viewing of familiar images. Thank you so much. One viewer says, how do you think, one of your students, Barbara Jaffe, is asking, how do you think the young Michelangelo would have judged his latest work?
Ooh.
Great question.
He might have been horrified. If ifs and ands could make tin cans.
Don't you think he would have had an appreciation of even if it wasn't his own work, perhaps another elderly artist, a great artist in the last days, wouldn't he have had the breath of soul to see it?
He might have. We know that he loved Donatello. You know, Donatello's Judith and Holofernes. We know he loved that. And when his pupil chastised the work for not being properly finished, Michelangelo said, well, works that are correctly conceived don't need that much finish. So conceivably, he could have seen what he considered to be his own artlessness later on, but gee, I just don't know.
I think we are so lucky to have so many poems and so many different entries by Michelangelo, to really be able to look back and 550 years ago and read kind of his states of his own soul.
Mm-hmm.
And Professor Hatfield, I find it fascinating that even though we planned this interview many months ago, it happens to be today, the moment when Pope Francis is buried in Rome. Mm. And this particular image, the Last Judgment, that is the cover of your book, will be exactly the fresco where the cardinals of the Catholic Church will be seated for days in the conclave under Michelangelo's own ceiling.
If you haven't seen the film The Conclave, be informed that each cardinal, before he votes, will be standing right in front of the Last Judgment, and particularly the part where you see the damned on their way down, and will have to swear that he is voting in complete compliance with the objectives of God and the Church.
And
so yes, that is an awesome thought.
Yes, and just the idea of the conclave, it really comes from a Latin word, cum clave, meaning that they would be locked from the outside world, kind of separate, with the key, as they make the different votes and choose the next pontiff of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Absolutely fascinating that Michelangelo's, just if they look up and see Michelangelo's ceiling, what they see is just naked bodies everywhere. And you go into this in the last chapter of your book. It is kind of unprecedented images that Michelangelo starts with his young work, maybe the Battle of the Centaur, and then how it kind of goes on.
Well, here's another curious thing, to get back to that movie, which I recommend. We very often see the Last Judgment, and we see the side walls. We never see the ceiling. Now, this isn't necessarily an editorial choice, a choice of the director. It could also have to do with the photographic rights, because I think the photographic rights to the ceiling belong to Japanese television. But that is a curiosity.
Yes, or probably just the cost itself. I have been working in some of these movies, and I know that whatever they choose to, there's a price for everything they use.
Yeah.
So interesting.
So listen, we're way off the track here. Do you think you can see a little bit of what I think I was trying to get at? I'm so pleased, and I hope you enjoy. I hope this enhances your enjoyment of works by Michelangelo and works by many, many other artists as well, particularly Italian, because this is basically Italian thought that we're dealing with.
And I love your use of the formosa as well, the term, such a beautiful word as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Professor Hatfield, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for sharing your brilliant mind with us, and thank you for welcoming us in your own studiolo. I wish we could show everyone your views, your beautiful views from here, but that will be for the next studiolo.
Okay.
Grazie.
Yeah. Yes, you can prepare a few photographs.
Yes.
Thank you.
So with this interview, we actually end the spring season of Paola's Studiolo. Professor Hatfield, I hope you will come back. I hope you can plan something in the fall. And thank you everyone for being with us today. Thanks to everyone who signed up for the whole series. It's always a pleasure to have you and to share this beautiful world of art history and art. Really the most sublime creations of our souls, right? With everyone.
Absolutely.
Grazie. Alla prossima.
Ciao.